remember, parable of the soils, there's ideas that have to make sense, and so we spent time kind of looking at key ideas, the central ones being who is the Father, that kind of the uniqueness of his character, and then the nature of the kingdom, and this what it means to co-work with God and how we're created for that. Right? And then we've looked at disciplines and the way in which these bodily practices work in order to take things that start with our focused attention and move them down into our soul, to what's automatic. Okay? And now we want to look at Jesus' account, his teaching, about some primary problems that we face in terms of relating to other people and to groups now that we've decided to live within the kingdom, to co-work with God. Okay? And I want to start by kind of putting this in a really broad setting. I want to make a contrast. Okay? When you look at the Greeks and Greek philosophers in the ancient world, they had an approach to social relations and to morality that we could just sum up under this tag. We could say they had a heroic ethic, a heroic ethic. Okay, the Greeks were enamored with heroes and heroism. Okay, so I'll just put heroism up. And what Jesus offers, which you may not think would be something that you would want or is needed, but what he actually offers that is the world desperately needs, is a non-heroic path to goodness. Now, what on earth does that mean, and why does it matter? Okay, when I say the Greeks were enamored with heroism and they had a heroic ethic, here's what I mean. You go all the way back to Homer and you see insofar as there's such thing as a conscience in somebody like Achilles or Agamemnon and all of these, right? What's in there is this hyper awareness of what people around them respect, what they'll admire. Okay? And what's been internalized is this drive to do things that are impressive to the human beings around. There's this awareness that I'm always being watched in some way by human beings, and they have a sense of what's great and what's something you would despise and disrespect. And I will always strive to be somebody that is honored, somebody that is respected. And that's actually the basis of the ethic that you get in the old Greek philosophers also. Okay? They change it in a number of ways, but it's always rooted in this sense of we pick up, our sense of morality comes from what the people around us praise or blame, what they admire or disrespect, what they will talk well about or kind of spit out, right? And that's the beginning of all of moral life when you go back to the Greek philosophers. And Aristotle's really clear about that the first principle for ethical knowledge is it starts by picking up you pick up habits based on what the noble person, the good person in a good city admires. Okay? So it's rooted, heroism is rooted in, we'll just say this, what human society honors or respects. Now, there's kind of a paradox that comes out of that. And it's this, that the Greek philosophers, they aimed at being morally impressive, at greatness. But because the way they did that was always thinking about what they would do in front of human beings to be seen by men, and now that phrase is going to mean a little something different, Okay? What they ended up with was kind of a moral mediocrity. Okay? They did better than a number of the barbarians, so to speak, but they only rose so far because at the heart of it was, I'm going to do something that will achieve fame, that will be respected by human beings. Now, what Jesus does is he actually comes and he offers a non-heroic path to goodness, and we've just seen some of that described in the last two sessions. Because what is the intention that we have to take on as we engage in our practices of right living? Who do we do it before? Before the Father alone. Okay? And other people may see it, but we try to not do it, as it were, before men. Okay? Now, part of what Jesus does here, the reason that he can offer a non-heroic path, is because for Jesus, we'll just say, in the kingdom, okay, the social context, so the social context is something else. The primary social context within the kingdom of God is the open heavens. And we won't spend a lot of time there right now, but let me just point out, you go to the beginning of Mark, and how does it begin? Chapter 1, there's this prophecy of what's going to happen, and John the Baptist starts preparing the way, and then Jesus comes, and when he's baptized, what happens? He sees the heavens torn open, and then he hears and he sees things. Okay? And it's actually interesting, it's a present participle there, the torn open. In other words, it's not like it pops open and comes back. It's the implication, it stays open. Okay? And part of what happens then throughout the Gospels is you find out that Jesus, the audience that he's playing to is not just human beings. Instead, beyond that, it's the Father and the holy angels. And he starts teaching his students how to live that way too. And so he'll say things like, if you're embarrassed, if you blush before this generation in order to, when you claim me, then I'll be ashamed before my Father and the holy angels when I come in my glory. Right? You see, what's happening is, where is the esteem? Where is the social approval or disapproval located that matters? Okay? Jesus says where the social approval really matters is in the heavens. And we learn to live before the Father and before all of that. Okay? And just part of what this means that there is that, there's always there's more persons in the room, if I can put it this way, than you can see. Okay? You cannot count looking around with your finger everybody in this room. Okay? Because when we gather in Jesus' name before the Father, there are others here with us. Okay? And part of what Jesus offers, the reason he has a non-heroic path to goodness, is because instead of doing what is impressive to the human beings right here, he teaches us to look past the human beings to the open heavens and to do what we do for that approval. Okay? And there's a second part to it. Heroism is about being impressive to those people. And so what you have in Greek ethics is you aspire to deeds that are impressive. But if you look at what Jesus teaches people, it's not how to turn the tide of a battle. It's not how to give the most impressive speech. He teaches people how to do things like help somebody in secret. How to give a cup of cold water. to somebody that's really thirsty and needs it. And it's those kind of acts that we focus on doing it as if we're just before the Father. And here's the paradox. Here's the paradox. You look back at 600 years of philosophy before Jesus, or 400 before Jesus, 500 before, or 600 before the early followers of Jesus are talking about this. And part of what you see is that the philosophers, by aiming at greatness, but before men, they ended up with mediocrity morally. And the paradox is that precisely by not thinking at all about greatness and not looking at men, but living before the Father alone, Jesus leads just thousands upon thousands of ordinary people to do and things, to live in ways that when the world does look at it, they can only think of it as morally heroic. They achieve greatness by not thinking about greatness. And that's what Jesus offers us, is a way for that. Okay? So, and that's rooted then, that sets up our approach to social relations. Okay? The first thing we always remember is our primary relation, our primary identity is in the heavens. Okay? It's that what opens up and the voice comes out tells Jesus who he is. You are my son, okay? My beloved, in you I'm well pleased. Okay? There's his identity. It's rooted in the heavens. And then human beings try to test it and all of that, and he has to negotiate it here. But that identity is rooted beyond human beings. Okay? Now here's the deal. Even though our identity and our primary relation is rooted in the heavens, this open heavens, we still have to live in interaction with the human beings that live next door that are part of this social order, right? We all have to interact with this age, with this social order. So the question that we have to ask is, how do we do that well as those who are receiving identity, as it were, from the heavens, from the Father? And Jesus addresses that in first the parable of the soils itself, and then it's interesting. The parable of the soils shows up in 3 different Gospels, and in all of the Gospels, there are either a parable or further sayings immediately after the parable of the soils that all expand on in some way other issues with social identity and social relations. Okay, so what we're going to do is look at these. What comes out is that it turns out there are 3 primary, but I'll just say obstacles or problems, right, in social relations with this age that Jesus' disciple or student has to negotiate. Okay, and the first one is in the parable of the soils itself. Okay, and so remember we've already looked at it, so I'll just kind of refresh your memory. We won't stop and read it right now. But he said the third kind of soil, it's the seed falls among the thorns, and it's the anxieties of the social order or age, and the deceit or illusion of wealth chokes the seed, and it doesn't become fruitful. And then Jesus says this, and so that's what's going on in this first one. This is what we would call seduction. Okay, to this society, right, or this social order's aims, right, goals. So seduction, and it's interesting what Jesus says here, because notice all of these are coming back to the level of attention, right? Because these are heart things. And so these are things that go wrong in how we consciously interact. Now, there's going to be soul level stuff too, I'm sure, but he comes back to this kind of focal point when we're relating. And he says that the first issue is that we would kind of get sucked in such a way that we would take on the world's own aspirations, what they think is worth living for, what's worth pursuing, and we would take on their anxieties, the things that they want to avoid, that they think would make life not worth living, okay? And the result is a kind of choking or smothering, okay? There's not room to breathe anymore. And I think what you could see here with this seduction is it's a distortion in a basic thing, a basic capacity that we're created with, which is the capacity for rapport, to kind of empathize, to get a sense of what somebody really thinks or wants, and make a connection, right? And that's a good thing in general. Like we need to be able to understand what's going on with people, but it's also the sort of thing that I can just allow myself to be sucked in to whatever the people around me think is worth living for and dying for, right? And so you can overdo rapport. You can agree with the circle you find yourself in such a way that now I'm really being controlled by this human social group. And what that does is I don't see past it anymore to the open heavens. My relationship with the Father is not what really gives me identity anymore. Okay? Now, it's interesting. Jesus, he addresses this in a number of places. And one of them is in John chapter 5, verse 44. He asks a question that's really important to ask. And again, you can kind of think in the background here of this notion that morality begins by intuiting what the people who matter in our society think is worth praising or blaming. Okay? Somebody read for us John chapter 5, verse 44. He's dealing in this section with the unbelief in the society around him. And he asks a really profound question.
How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God?
Read that again, and just a little bit slower and nice and loud.
Okay. How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God?
Okay? You see, he's pointing out that it's actually impossible for me to come to a place where I trust God and live in step with Him, and at the same time, while I'm looking at the human beings around me, and I'm wondering, what do they think? Will they approve? If I'm looking for approval, for glory, right, fame from other people, then I will be incapacitated by that from really trusting God. Okay? So it's a very important diagnostic question. Okay? From whom do I seek approval? From whom do I seek approval? Okay? Now, Jesus is very clear. So John 12, I won't read it. I'll just tell you what it says here, verse 51 and following, that he brings a need to, his message calls for us to, I'm going to say, individuate. In other words, to do things that I have to do something for myself, and you have to do something for yourself, and it will set us apart from just being a part of the group that we find ourselves in. And he says, do you think I came to bring peace? Not peace, but division. He said, I came and, 5 members of a family will be set against each other. A father against a son, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, so forth, right? What's his point there? His point is that when this message comes, each of us has to respond to it. Each of us has to respond to it. There's some things that we have to do for ourselves. And as we respond, that's going to change the nature of our relationship with human beings around us. It is going to do that. Okay? Now, let me just add another thing that Jesus talks about. He talks about a narrow path and a tight gate. And one thing about a tight gate and a narrow path is that you can have a big group on one side and you can have a big group on the other side, but they can't pass through as a group. With a tight gate, it's one by one. Okay? And there's an element of this that we have to adapt to. We have to kind of recognize that there are decisions we're called to that make us step out of rapport with our social group, with the human social group, and instead look beyond that to our interaction with the Father. Okay? So one thing that will prevent us from full transformation, one thing that will prevent us is to be unwilling to step out from our society. Okay, we have to be willing to stand in that position where we're even alone at a point. Okay, doing the thing that nobody else would do. Now, and so seduction, that will stop us from working well with God. But there's a kind of contrary posture or approach to interacting with people that will also keep us from working well with God and growing to our full capacity. And that is a kind of obsessive opposition to the world. And this comes out in the parable of the wheat and the tares. So Matthew chapter 13, you get first the parable and then the explanation. And so this one we'll read. So Matthew 13, verse 24 through 30, and then 36 through 43. And I'm going to just point out here that this is coming right after Jesus has described this seduction by the world. Okay? And he now kind of talks about something that is almost the opposite. So somebody read it for us, and we'll then unpack it a little bit.
Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn."
Okay, then 36 through 43, we get his explanation of this. Okay. So go ahead and read it.
Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear.
Okay, thank you. So the situation in this parable is that as we come to live in this world, co-working with God, we look out at it, and he says that the field is the world. So this isn't just about stuff in the church. This is about the world as a whole, right? And we see that you have good seed and bad seed. He says this is, the translation was the people of the kingdom, the people of the evil one. Behind that is the word, it's the sons of the kingdom, the sons of the evil one. Son means to have the character of. Okay? So you have those that have the character of this co-working with God, and you have others that have the character of the evil one that are producing evil in the world. Simply what he's saying is we look out at the world and we see there's good people doing good things. We see people that are yet bad doing bad things, and they're all mixed up together. And that's the experience we have in this world. Now, his servants, and this is where we see the kind of the second problem that we can face, is his servants, they want to fix it now. They're like, let's go and rip them out. Let me go in the field. I'm going to pull all the bad stuff up. In other words, let's counteract every injustice we see in the world. Let's intervene. Let's bring down the bad people. Let's fix it now. And what you see here, it's like the other end of the psychological spectrum. You're not being seduced by the world anymore. Now what's happening, and this is also a distraction, is I'm obsessing on everything I see wrong in the world. And that's taking up my attention. There's this kind of twitchy, agitated, angry, readiness to oppose everything that I see wrong. And it's really instructive here to look at what he says. He says, no, if you go and pull up the bad stuff, you may, the word he uses is uproot the wheat too. Now, he says this right after the parable of the soils. What are the roots? The practices, right? The daily practices, the disciplines. In other words, what he's saying is, if you get too obsessive about trying to actively intervene and oppose everything wrong you see in the world, it will detract from your own and probably others' capacity to engage in those kinds of disciplines that prepare a person to deal with the difficulties in the world. Because remember, without the roots, it's the scandals get you, right? And so he says later there will be those that are sent out, the holy angels, and they'll pull up the scandals, the offenses, right? He says, look, the Creator has actually arranged for beings, he has fashioned beings that will put an end to the last of the injustices. It's just, and there's a moment for that. It's just, you're not that being, and this isn't that moment. Okay? And so it's possible to get so fixated and so angry and so overly focused on the injustice that we see that actually distracts us from relating to the Father and doing the things that we need to do in order to work with God. Let me just give you a little word of part of what this is critiquing. It's what in Scripture is often referred to as zeal. Okay? And that goes all the way back through, it's a type that runs throughout the Old Testament and into the New. You see it first in Levi, really, and Simeon, when their sister is defiled, they go after and take out the whole village, right? They trick them and slaughter them, and it's because of this zeal, and it continues on. You see the similar kind of thing in the personality of Moses as a young man. He's changed later, but as a young man, when he sees the Egyptian beating the Hebrew, what does he do? He kills him, buries him, right? And he thinks the people are going to understand, right? But it's an overreaction, okay? This is prone to overreaction, okay? But it continues. Then you have Phineas, and there's some upside to this, but it's not safe on its own, right? So Phineas, he finds the man and the woman, engaged in kind of a ritual sex in the tabernacle, and he's overcome with zeal, and he takes a spear and drives it through both of them. And in that case, he's blessed for it, right? But it's still, this is something that can easily get out of control, okay? You find it in Elijah, right? He also destroys, after he destroys the 400 prophets of Baal, he describes that as zeal, okay? Zeal is essentially, it's this sense of, for the world to be made right, I have to be ready to actively intervene and violently end what is polluting in the world. Okay? Huh?
You find it in Paul.
I couldn't hear you.
You find it in Paul.
You find it in Paul also, yeah. Paul, when he describes who he was as Saul and the reason that he persecuted the church, he says, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church. Okay? And you find Jesus countering this in James and John, or modifying it, right? Remember, the Samaritan people villages won't accept him, and so they say, hey, can we call down fire like Elijah did? And he says, you don't know what spirit you're of. Okay? So anyhow, this is something that can get out of control and become something that destroys our capacity to interact well with the Father and the open heavens, as well as negotiating our relations in this world. Okay? So seduction is one problem, but obsessive opposition, it's the opposite, but it'll get you there as well. It'll also derail us from this process. Let me say one other word. The bottom of that passage, he said, so the angels, they'll sort all this out in the end. And then in the division, there'll be those where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth, and you can think of that as the regret and the frustration that comes from a life of being set against God. But then he says, on the other hand, then the right living will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Okay? And just say something about the shining. Okay? This is a standard way in the ancient world of depicting an immortal. And the point of this is, why is it possible, why is it wise to not get too wrapped up in like putting everything that we have and everything that we are into every single injustice that we see in the world? It's because we live in a time frame that's bigger than that. You're going to live forever. Right? You're going to live forever. With that kind of a time frame, the fact that you're not going to cease to exist. Yes, this body will die, but that's not the end of it. There's also resurrection. With that kind of time frame, we can have a patience in our working with God and in His timing in the world. And so we can hand over some of these outcomes to God. Right? Now, that's not to say there's never a point where we intervene. And Jesus Himself, at the beginning of John, remember this, at the beginning of John, you have a kind of redemption of zeal when He cleanses the temple. But what He's doing there is, it's significantly different. It's measured. Right? He doesn't take a spear and run it through the people. Right? He drives them out. Right? And there is a proper way to make use of zeal. Okay? But it has to be redeemed. And that'll be a lesson of its own to come back to how Jesus uses that, okay? But We can come back to that. Okay. The third thing that is a problem is hiding. And this is, so in Mark and Luke, we get these sayings right after. Nobody lights a lamp in order to then put it under a couch or under a grain basket. Instead, you put it on a lampstand so it can shine to all in the house. Okay? And then you have a series of sayings following this. Nothing is hidden except for the purpose of being revealed. Nothing's covered up that isn't going to eventually come out. What's spoken in secret is going to be spoken in public, right? And so be thoughtful about how you listen, right? Be careful how you listen and what you listen to. Now, it starts with the primary problem is hiding in this case, covering over what you are as a follower of Jesus and what you've received. And I think what's going on here in this case, I'm going to call this resignation. To be resigned is essentially to say, I don't like it, I don't think it's right, but it's impossible to change it, so I guess I'm just going to go along. There's nothing I can do about it, okay? And I think that's what he's talking about when he talks about like lighting a lamp or and then covering it over. This is the person, or this is the condition for a student who sees, at least at the beginning, that Jesus' way is the best, but he doesn't trust that it will be ultimately effective, and so decides to kind of meld in. He's not seduced. It's not like he's pursuing the things of the world. He's just trying to meld in, to kind of camouflage, right? That's a different thing. Okay. Now let's just do one of these, I suppose. So, well, we can do two. Well, let's start with Luke. Luke chapter 8, 16 through 18. And then I want to point out this kind of flow of these three primary convictions that make it possible to live. The opposite of hiding is to live with transparency or openness. Okay? So, Luke 8, 16 to 18. Somebody read it nice and loud for us.
No one lights a lamp and hides it in a clay jar or puts it under a bed. Instead, they put it on a stand so that those who come in can see the light. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be made known or brought out into the open. Mm-hmm. Therefore, consider carefully how you listen. Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what they think they have will be taken from them.
Okay, very good. And now, Mark chapter 3, verses 21 through 25.
And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, he's out of his mind. And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, he is possessed by Beelzebub, and by the prince of the demons he casts out the demons. And he called them to him and said to them in parables.
I'm sorry, I gave you.
Yeah.
No, I gave you the wrong. It's chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
I didn't write it properly in there. It's the right verses. It's the wrong chapter. Yeah. So chapter 4, 21 through 25.
Through 25. Okay. Mm-hmm. And he said to them, is a lamp brought in to be put under a basket or under a bed and not on a stand? For nothing is hidden except to be made manifest, nor is anything secret except to come to light. If anyone has ears, let him hear. Ears to hear, let him hear. And he said to them, pay attention to what you hear. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you. For to the one who has, more will be given, and from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so what you see here, you take these two collections together, and there's three kind of convictions that make it possible for us to live with a kind of open transparency in our social relationships as a student of Jesus. And I'll just say kind of the goal here seems to be, if it's not hiding, it's something like, I am what I, just exactly what I am wherever I, with people. I don't need to change it because of their opinions or anything like that. It's who I am, right? And it doesn't mean I need to brand everything, but and turn it into some, an occasion to talk about Jesus or something. But in just natural ways, if I'm learning something from Jesus, I can share it where I'm at, And the reason we can do that, we can achieve that kind of openness or transparency, is because of these three things. The first is, he says, is this conviction that openness will ultimately win out, or truth will out. Okay, truth comes out. Okay? That there's nothing hidden that won't eventually be revealed. And so we can have that as a conviction within the open heavens, knowing that God's at work. Eventually, everything is going to come to light. Everything. And so we can live in ways that don't need any hiding because of that. Okay. The second thing is, he says, consider how you listen. Okay. In other words, as we're interacting with people, it's important that we actually discern what's going on in what we listen to. Okay. 1,000 affirmations of something that are false won't make it true, but if I'm listening to it, it might convince me to do something misguided, right? And so just think about how you're listening. If you are taking what they're saying in such a way that you're kind of you're thinking that it's ultimately going to win in the world, then you may find yourself resigning to it when you shouldn't. Okay? And then the final thing is, he said this, to him who has, more will be given. To he who does not have, even what he thinks he has will be taken away. The third element of this is, think about these positive feedback loops in your social interactions. Here's the thing that happens here. If we have openness and we take whatever it is we're learning from Jesus and we just let it be there in an open, transparent way in our interactions with other people, that will lead us to more insight. The one who has, more shall be added. But if we hide, if we try to cover over, we know something, we've learned something from Jesus, but I'm not going to bring it out in my social situation. I'm gonna tuck it away. I'll keep it. I know that, but it's awkward. They're not going to accept it well. Why shake the boat? Right? Then to him who doesn't have, even what he thinks he has, it'll be taken away. In other words, that insight that you started with, but you kind of refuse to bring out, that you hide, it'll start to get fuzzy. Even that degree of understanding will start to slip away if you don't bring it into your social world. Okay? And so there's feedback loops. If I start to hide, I start to diminish even what I understand. But if I act out in public in just a transparent, open way what I do understand, that'll lead to further insight and further understanding. Okay? And so that's what will draw us out of this third pitfall, or this third problem of hiding or resignation. Okay? So, what is it about all three of these that will cripple us in our social relations. Ultimately, what all three of these do, just in different ways, is they foreground the merely human social environment in such a way that they block from view the Father and the open heavens. But also just setting ourselves dead set against whatever it is the people around us are doing and fixating on that also will block us from seeing the Father if we get too obsessed with that, right? And then acting as if it's impossible to change anything in our social world, right? Just kind of giving up, covering over, resigning. That also, it makes this human element of the social world bigger than it really is, and it blocks the Father from view. All of these are ways, or kind of psychological postures, we could say, right? That uproot us from the open heavens and distort our way of interacting with people here in this social order in this age. Okay? All right. Questions, comments? Let's stop on that.
How can we change those things and make it positive?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay. So the primary thing here is to, as it were, see past it to the goals of the kingdom, right? And you see, because this is essentially about what are the aims that are approved or disapproved. And so what we do when we bring ourselves before the Father alone brings us beyond this, and we find kind of new goals, new passions, a bigger project to be a part of that puts in perspective all the things that the world is otherwise pursuing. And something similar is happening here when we see injustices. Now, let me say one more word here. What you may be thinking is, but I can't just do nothing, right? And I don't think Jesus is saying do nothing, because remember, what we're doing, instead of becoming kind of obsessed and angry all the time about the wrong, is we are actively joining with God in the things He's doing. So we're engaging in bringing more good into the world in partnership with God. And certainly, whenever something is within our power to simply stop, we will do that, because that's part of co-working with God. But there's always going to be more evil out there that's out of our reach. Okay? And we shouldn't obsess on that. What we do when we are working with God and focusing on changing first what's wrong right here and then within our reach. Okay? First of all, that's not nothing. And what it's doing is it's changing the one part of the world that we have direct access to change. And that's ourself and the things that are within our power to do. Okay? And so, co-working with God is the alternate focus to just countering the evil out there. Okay? And the irony is, I think we usually end up countering more evil by just co-working with God than by focusing on nothing but that. It's possible to be against a lot of things, but if you're not for something better, it doesn't end up changing things, right? And then the essence of this is this, like, trust that truth comes out. When God's at work, a little bit of light coming into a dark spot, guess which one wins? Light always wins. It always wins. And so that's it. Okay? We know that light overcomes darkness.